Hey, friends, welcome into another edition of 4 Minutes on Friday. Today, wanted to talk to you about something that I have been talking to students about in different interactions that I have, whether coaching or team building. And I just think it's a really powerful, um, powerful thing to think about and to consider. And this isn't something that's just for students. This is for I have to remind myself of this as an adult. So I think this has some power for us, and it really comes out of the story of Chris Herron. And if you're not familiar with Chris Herron, he was a highly recruited basketball player. And I believe this was in the middle to late 90s. I'll have to check that. And I will put a link to a link to some of his stories on YouTube. And he also has there's a special on ESPN Plus. If you're a subscriber there, it's called Unguarded. And I'll put a link to all that stuff. So you can check out more of his story. There are, I don't know, there's probably half a dozen videos with his highlights as a high school, college, and pro basketball player. And then some of his story of addiction. And that's really, I just wanted to thumbnail capture some of what he talks about and then kind of expand on it for us. Chris Herron was a highly recruited basketball player in high school. And he went to Fresno State, ultimately is drafted, went into the NBA and spent a handful of years in the NBA, some other leagues around the world. The reason part of the reason his career was cut short was because, by his own admission, his addiction issues, alcohol and drugs in various formats. And Chris is extraordinarily honest when he talks about that addiction. And in short, he says, look, I was in his high school, and you can imagine being a highly recruited basketball player, you're probably the most popular kid in your high school class, and maybe in the entire school, and was invited to parties and all of those kind of things. And he began abusing alcohol and drugs during his high school career. He even self-describes himself as a high school alcoholic and drug addict. And he says the reason, he didn't realize this at the time, but the reason that he was doing that was because he felt if you can imagine, felt very inadequate in those settings where he would have to walk into a party or be around people outside of the basketball court. And that was just a total struggle. Now, this reflects something that I've talked about before here, and that just continues to show up in my life, is our personal insecurities become the thing that really kind of haunt and follow us if they are not dealt with on a very interpersonal and honest level. And that's really what had happened with Chris Herron. Now, he goes around, and I believe he's still doing this. He goes around to high schools and talks to high school students, just telling his story and his sense of inadequacy and his feeling of, I can't go into that party or into that setting without being drunk or high. I mean, these are things that he says about his experience. And one of the things that is so powerful in his kind of testimony, if you will, is he just looks at these high school students and says, whatever you are dealing with, whatever demons you're fighting, whatever insecurities or inadequacies you feel like you have, very simple phrase, he says, you are enough. And the first time I heard that, I was like, man, that is powerful. And he goes on to expand on it. He says things like, you don't have to pretend to be somebody else anymore. You are enough. You don't have to hope that something greater or better happens to you, that you have greater or better gifts or talents. You are enough. And just to expand on that, I mean, you talk about dealing with your sense of personal insecurities and struggles. And again, we all have these. This is something that landed on me when I was still doing some therapy and some counseling. that our personal insecurities and feeling like we are not enough lead to most of the problems that you and I struggle with. So I just want to remind you very, very simply, whether you are an adult or a student, college, new career, you're in your 50s, you're in your 70s, you are enough. Whatever it is that you are wrestling with and fighting with, you are enough. Now, I have some very strong beliefs that we need an infusion of God in our lives on a daily basis if we are going to accomplish the things that He has set before us. But maybe that's not you. And maybe you just need to be reminded that you have been endowed and given certain gifts and abilities, and those things have been given and endowed to you by a creator who sees you as enough. All right, see you next week.